Aging Well debate we're going to have today. I'm Sam Mauger, the Chief Executive of the Third Age Trust. This is the first time we've had the opportunity to have one of these kind of debates, and I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you're going to be great participators in it. We want you to ask lots of questions. I'd like to introduce the panel we have with us today. So at the far end, we have Professor Janice Thompson, who's leading on health and nutrition, and is a leading expert in the field of public health, nutrition and exercise, and their role in preventing and treating risks for things like diabetes, cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes across the lifespan. We have Ed Watts, who is leading on ageing and the arts, and Ed sits on the cultural steering group for Age Friendly Manchester, who are looking at a citywide approach on culture and ageing. And Ed is part of the Whitworth Museum's dynamic learning and engagement team, and they work with audience across health, social care, volunteering and education to find new ways to work and extend their reach. And finally we have Eric Midwinter, who you will all know as one of our founders and a lifelong advocate on lifelong learning. He's worked in the lifelong learning and education sector for all of his life, and all of you will know very much about Eric, so thank you to Eric. We're sorry not to have Professor Keith Percy and Mervyn Eastman with us this afternoon. Unfortunately, they've both been taken seriously ill. So I'm going to chair this afternoon, and Eric very kindly has agreed to be our lead on lifelong learning. So our panel this afternoon, who are all great experts in their field. I just wanted to start with a few facts, perhaps to get us going. So by 2033, a quarter of the population will be over the age of 65, a quarter of the population. Survival over an average of more than 9 years was associated with greater enjoyment in life. So if you enjoy life, you're going to live on average 9 years longer, so that's good. There are 49,000 amateur arts groups in England, representing 9.4 million people, and even more when we include Scotland and Wales. And finally, NIAS found that lifelong learning resulted in a positive impact on social relationships to the value of £658 to each individual, and health is a value of £148 to each individual. So doing good things has a great benefit to us. So I'm going to start by asking each member of the panel just to give us 5 minutes in their field of expertise, and then we'll open it up to you to ask us some questions. So I'm going to start with Janice.
Can you hear me? Is that all right? Yeah? Good? Okay. As Sam already mentioned, my name is Janice Thompson. I'm a professor of public health, nutrition and exercise here at the University of Birmingham. The building I work in is about just a 5-minute walk from here, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to leave the office, stretch my legs and get more steps in today, which is always important. So I do a wide range of research with diverse communities, so I very much work in communities across the lifespan to try to promote healthy eating, which takes many forms, and promote regular physical activity and reducing how much we sit. So anytime you want to stand up today, feel free to do so. I don't want to contribute to your sitting time, so please do that. And I work with some fantastic people in our school who do things all the way from cellular sort of tissue level research up through, again, very applied sorts of research, children through older adults. So I thank you for the invitation, and hopefully any questions you have for me, I will do my best to answer. Ed.
Yeah, so I'm Ed Watts, and I'm from the Whitworth in Manchester. I'm the engagement manager there, so I work with a fantastic team of people that really try and engage as wide a possible audience as we can, both in the gallery but out in the community. So we do a lot of work with different groups to really give groups and communities the power and the agency in that. So I don't ever do any work that is to people. I try not to be a broadcasting museum and gallery, so we always work with people to create their own culture and create their own views and content going forward. So I like working with people. I never work alone. I don't like that. It's not in my nature. What we'll talk about today mainly, though, is my work with Age Friendly Manchester. So in 2001, Manchester became a World Health Organization age-friendly city with the very simple mission of making Manchester one of the best cities to grow older in. So hopefully the cultural offer within the city adds to that. And culture became a very quick part of that. So a way to bring people together and connect people through the fantastic arts and culture offer we have in the city of a predominantly free access museums, galleries, theatres and orchestras. So I sit on the cultural offer steering group. So once a quarter, a collection of over 40 organisations come together and discuss the citywide cultural offer for its older audiences. And a lot of what drives that is a lot of the funding and the energy around engagement and learning within museums and galleries was centred around children and young people. And what we wanted to do is readdress that balance and make sure that everyone within the communities around these places could access the high quality art and culture that had to offer. And just to say as well, sat in a fantastic university here as well. So the Whitworth is also the University of Manchester's University Art Gallery. So research and looking at other ways apart from participation is something that means a lot to us. We produce a lot of research, we do a lot of studies and work with groups to really show the impact of that work. But yeah, welcome some questions from that. I'll discuss more things after that.
Education's been defined as the casting of artificial pearls before real swine. For many people, that's exactly what it is. Rigid, inflexible, boring, hidden away in insulated establishments and institutions. So as soon as you start talking about lifelong learning, you've not only got to think about the spread of learning from what someone said was from Currycott to crematorium. You've got to think of more of the type of education that's going on. And when you've only got 5 minutes, a good person to turn to is one of the greatest of educational philosophers, the American John Dewey, who defined education as participation in rather than preparation for. And if you can get, as a society, if we can get our minds around that education is what's happening at the moment and something that delights as it does so, because there can be no education without enjoyment, then we may be getting somewhere. If we can build a chain of types of offering flexible learning. I was very much concerned with community education, community schools, and we used to define the community school as the school where you didn't know where the school stopped and the community started. And one of the links in the chain, I'm optimistic enough to consider, is of course the University of the Third Age, which is of that type, a first-class example. As I've often said, we never started the U3A as a reach-me-down cheap herb job for getting a few old people off the streets. It was as an example of what all education should be, part not of a national instruction system, but part of a national education service.
Thank you. So thank you very much. So now it's over to you. So we want all of you to, or as many of you as possible, to participate. Have we got any questions to start us off? If you could put your hand up, we will pass you a microphone and speak into the microphone when you have it. Okay?
Hello. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Bob Duckmanton from Warsash U3A. So I enjoy the U3A, but impact does this lifelong learning have on with me, other than just having a really good time? Get the question?
I'm sorry, what was
What's the impact of lifelong learning other than having a nice time?
Well, the impact of lifelong learning certainly should start with having a good time. As I say, there's no point in doing it unless you're enjoying it. But the refractions of that are certainly to do with mental health and possibly physical health. The clinical evidence is pretty strong. It's also to do with social companionship in a society where isolation and loneliness is often becoming paramount. It then has wider effects on the people around, family, neighbours, community at large. Certainly, the message of a U3A group, as we always intended to be when we set up the organisation, is that on a Tuesday morning, each time you go to your French conversation or local history or whatever it is, interest group, you are waving a banner. You are waving a stand as a pioneer who's saying, look at me, I'm an active citizen, not a passive social casualty.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks. Anyone else want to contribute to that? Yes, this gentleman over here.
Thank you for that. Being attacked from two sides by two sprightly young ladies. Thank you very much. The name's Ian Wright, Carterton U3A. A couple of our speakers on the panel there are talking about culture. My question is very simple. What do they mean by culture? Do they mean culture in the way I think of culture? So carry on. Thank you.
Okay, Ed.
Yeah, really good question. The starting point for that is, I don't know what you define as culture, so it's very, and I think everyone will then have a different view on it. I think as a visual arts organisation that holds a historic fine art collection as well as contemporary works that are now moving in towards, moving away from the conventions and the canons of watercolour and sculpture into video installation, and we've got some works in the collection that are literally just some bread boxes stacked up. An artist is defined as visual arts. So the parameters around culture and visual arts massively shifting and mean different things to different people. But I think in the work we do in Age Friendly Manchester, the reason why we determine culture as a broader piece of work is so it tries to envelop all from kind of the community. So different people's culture and heritage, but also those culture objects that are held within museums and galleries, and we try and work with those on an equal playing field. So the objects and artifacts within museums being viewed as just as interesting as the oral histories and the wealth of understanding and knowledge and talents that are out there within the community and the people that we work with as well. So I kind of throw culture out there and let people define it for themselves, but I try and envelop lots of different types of artistic platforms. So in Age Friendly Manchester, we've got orchestras, theatres, museums, galleries, festivals, small production companies. So we try and work with a broader base of people as possible, and then hopefully that then can allow different access points for different types of people to engage as well.
I know you've done some particular work with older men.
Yeah.
Do you want to say a bit about that?
Yeah, I think that work also relates to the previous question as well. So Manchester is looked upon because it was quite early in the game as such as using culture with its work around ageing. It's looked upon internationally as a leader in that, and that's really about its collaborative approach. So museums, galleries, and theatres being open to working together. So the strength in numbers of that. So even with that and its recognition it's had, so older men still fell into the minority of those participating in those activities. I don't know if that chimes with some groups that you work with, but it seemed harder for these organisations, specifically within participation activities, to get the blokes engaging with it. So we got some funding from an organisation called the Bearing Foundation to specifically look at that across the UK. So we spoke to men's groups from 6 case studies of best practice from across the UK, from a museum in Glasgow, the Borough Collection, through to a men's shed in Rhyl, a Bengali men's dance group in Bethnal Green. We had a really good spread of different types of group and different types of men that we're speaking to. And it all really came down to one thing that was really missing from a lot of the conventional activities that were happening in museums and galleries. And the big driver that men were missing was purpose. So quite often museums and galleries were setting up activities that were kind of come and try your hand at something in a fun and friendly atmosphere, but you would maybe learn something, but it was more about being part of a group. Men were a little bit kind of, what's the point? What am I doing this for? Can I be more useful? And we found that giving those instructions, that actually asking, can people help with the activity rather than can we help you, was a much more inviting opportunity. And I think that leads to things around kind of, why are we doing this? Is it just for my own enjoyment? Actually, no, it goes far beyond that. And we found men are really at high risk as they age in terms of falling into social isolation and loneliness at higher percentage than their female counterparts. I think retirement, as you lose your social network through work and the loss of loved ones, men seem slightly less resilient on a whole, obviously this is all in generalisation, to build new social networks. And we found that lifelong learning, art and cultural activities can be a real key to unlocking some of those problems.
Thank you. Any questions? Any more questions?
Mercedes Fonfria from Wolverhampton. 2 ifs and a question, a double-barrel question. If the arts and long life learning are conducive to good health, and if most of our membership already have had experience of the arts and lifelong learning, this is the question, would the U3A as a movement have some ethical responsibility to extend its benefits to those who have had more limited experience of both artistic endeavors and learning? And if so, what would that entail, apart from simply being open to anyone who wants to come to us? Would it entail some proactive measures?
Okay. So the question is, should we proactively?
Yeah. Why did Michael Young, one of my 2 colleague founders, why did he insist when setting up the charity, he called it the Third Age Trust rather than the University of the Third Age? The reason was because he hoped that other groups, other organisations, other attempts to pioneer some kind of activity for older people might come forward and could use the Third Age Trust as a vehicle until it got its own charitable status or whatever. What was Peter Laslett, the other of my founding friends, what was Peter Laslett's biggest anxiety after the founding of the University of the Third Age? His hope had been, and ours to some extent, but his, I think, more than Michael and myself, he hoped that when the U3A started, 20, 30, 40, 50 other organisations would jump up and start all over the place. And they didn't, and he was incredibly disappointed by that. It'd take me half an hour to explain why, and I won't attempt to do that now, except to say that unfortunately, to some extent, I found that over those next years that U3A was regarded as the answer. And people were asking questions like, why aren't you doing it for this group, that group, whatever group? And I've had to say over and over again, the U3A is very good for those for whom the U3A is very good. I mean, I'm ambitious about membership, but my own research suggests that at any one time about 1 million of the 12 million people who are in the third age would benefit from the U3A. It's not for everybody. If there are steps forward for the third age trust as such, I think it still remains to some extent in those initial thoughts that both Peter and Michael had, that other sorts of groups might begin. They may, and we've examples here of what they might be from my friends here. They might be more art, music, or whatever orientated. They might be more health orientated. They might be more exercise orientated, and so on. But it might be finance. It might be housing repair, and so there are all kinds of opportunities. Not only educational ones. We chose education. We could have chosen one of the other themes. Education happened to be our background. So the University of the Third Age can only do well. It can only attract those for whom it would benefit. What we lack, and it's not only in the, as I think indicated in my initial thoughts, it's not only in the older age group where there are deficits of that kind. What we lack are 15, 20, 25, 30 equivalents, if you understand, equivalents with different themes in older age.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Right, so this gentleman here.
This lady,
Okay, maybe not. Is that lady at the back?
yes, hello. Really, this is because I was feeling sorry for Janice over there, not being brought into the conversation.
Never ever feel sorry for Janice. No need, no need.
I wonder if you could explain, because lots of people don't realise the difference between type 1 diabetes and type 2. And type 2 is a growing problem that's going to break the NHS. And as you've done work in this field, could you explain what people can do to prevent type 2?
Yes. Thank you for the question. In a brief response, both diabetes overall, any type of diabetes is an inability to metabolize sugar or blood glucose. It means our blood glucose rises because we can't metabolize carbohydrates properly and store them. And that's kind of a simplistic definition. There's different reasons, though, behind it, or mechanisms. So type 1, we don't know exactly what causes it, although most research indicates it's a type of an possible autoimmune disease, where at a very early age, possibly in the womb, or at early childhood, your body attacks itself. So the pancreas is what produces our insulin. So the body attacks the pancreas itself, rendering us unable to even produce insulin, because the cells in the pancreas help us produce insulin. When that happens, that's why people who have type 1 diabetes have to be insulin dependent, because their pancreas can no longer produce insulin to the amount that's necessary or able to help us metabolize and store glucose or carbohydrate. Does that make sense? So that's type 1. It can come on very suddenly, and like I said, it's always insulin dependent because of the damage that happens to the pancreas. Now, type 2 is considered more of a lifestyle, quote-unquote, disease, although it has a genetic component. All diabetes, all types of diabetes have a genetic component. My family, there's type 1, there's also type 2, and there's gestational. I haven't had any of those three, but I'm at higher risk for actually for type 2 or gestational. I probably wouldn't get type 1 at this age, possible, but unlikely. So type 2 is where our bodies become insensitive to the insulin that we have. So we still produce, in early phases, we're still producing plenty of insulin, but our cells become insensitive to it. So the pancreas has to keep producing more and more insulin, in a sense, to catch up, so that the cells can be responsive and take that glucose or take that carbohydrate into the cells. And so over a long period of time, So we can have risk for diabetes type 2 for 10, 15, 20 years before we might be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, before our blood glucose levels get so high that now they're detectable and you'd be diagnosed with diabetes. So type 2 is preventable. What causes it? Again, exactly what causes it, we don't know. It's a bit of a chicken and an egg argument, but we know that insulin resistance, or insensitivity to insulin, is definitely triggered through obesity and lack of exercise, or lack of movement, lack of physical activity. Those are two primary drivers behind increasing our risk for type 2 diabetes. So the bottom line is how do we prevent it? We have quite a bit of time to prevent it, but each of us has a different risk. There is no zero risk for type 2 diabetes. Everybody in every population has some level of risk for type 2 diabetes. None of you are immune or protected. However, people who are more active and people who can keep their body weight to within a more healthy level, and there's a range for that, because some groups can get type 2 diabetes when they have very healthy weight. It's genetic, it's unlucky, it's bad news for them. But if they stay really active, they can reduce that risk as well. So really, those are the primary things that we can do to prevent type 2 diabetes. And those are sometimes the hardest things to do. They're the easiest to talk about, but because I do this every day, I find that they're the behaviors that humans have that are hardest to change, because it's really, really complex and multidisciplinary why people live the way they do, why they make choices, or for some people, they don't even have the independence to make some of those choices. So it can be quite a complex picture, but I hope that answered your question. Did I miss anything? No. Have your heads exploded? Are you guys okay? Are you with me here? Good, okay.
Okay, do you wanted to ask your question?
Philip O'Shea and Whitworth, Birmingham. If your lifestyle is like a couch potato, when's the best time? Is it too late to start being active and in long learning? And really, when's the best time to start before you get to couch potato?
All right, I like that question. It is never too late to start. Every minute of every day is the best time to start, okay? Really, every human body responds to physical activity and its benefits. And the biggest benefit we get as humans is going from doing nothing, the couch potato world, to doing something. The health benefit, the mental health benefits, the emotional benefits, the social benefits, the biggest they are is when we go from doing nothing to a bit of something. That's really important. So people sometimes clearly have to modify what they can do based on physical conditions, or they might get ill. It's really something we try to do daily, but we know it fluctuates throughout our lifespan based on circumstances. So I start over again all the time. I work way too many hours. It gets in the way of lots of other things in my life. And if I just gave up and said, I'm just not going to exercise until I retire, I just keep trying. I don't want to wait that long. So in a sense, we should just always keep trying to do it and feel good about everything you do, because everything you do matters. And the research that we've done shows that people getting out, just getting out and about for any reason, leaving the house, substantially increases people's activity levels, even if you're not going out to exercise. So that part's really important as well.
Excellent. So that lady over there.
Hello, Mike, Isles of Scilly, U3A. It's been my observation that even within our very small U3A, females outnumber males by a ratio of about 10 to 1. And I don't think we're probably unique in that. So I'm asking the team to suggest how we might improve matters in that respect.
Okay, so do you want to start?
Shall I start? Yeah, so it's a really familiar question. It's something that I've mentioned briefly before around the research we did, and we did it in 2015, and we produced this, which you probably won't see from here, but it's a small little, it's called the Handbook for Cultural Engagement with Older Men, and that was made specifically because of that. Yeah. Yeah, so if anyone wants one of these, find me. I've not brought enough for everyone, but it is available online to download. So it's a kind of really handy guide for anyone that has groups that maybe wants to diversify and have more men within them. So it was done by a PhD researcher, so it's got a kind of rigorous academic methodology to it. But as it was produced by myself and an art gallery, academics are really, really good at speaking to academics sometimes. We try to make it quite a digestible, readable document. So it's quite snappy, it's quite short, it's quite conversational in tone, so hopefully it makes a quite interesting read. But it's had amazing reach, so something that I first noticed in my art gallery in Manchester, that I then spoke to kind of UK professionals about within the art sector, has really grown into just shining a light on something that seems to be kind of prevalent across lots of different activities across the world. So I got asked to speak about this in Sydney, so I ended up at the Sydney Opera House talking about old men from Manchester. Last month I was asked to go on an exchange to Taiwan, where they're having the same problem, it seemed, when I got out in Taiwan. So it's really a problem across the board, and like I say, it seems to be around this, the invitation, I think, seems to be wrong. The way we're speaking about what we do isn't, it's not getting the men to kind of want to gravitate towards it. And the thing from my research was that thing around purpose, and just bringing in kind of across the panel here as well about the health aspects as well. So the conclusions here were that men-only groups aren't the answer, and mixed groups aren't the answer. There's not one size fits all. It's about really working, seeing what your own context is and making a situation work for that. But we had a situation in one of the case studies where we had a group of Bengali men who had to meet as single sex for cultural and religious reasons. And we interviewed the men, a group, and we also interviewed the dance practitioner who was from a fantastic dance company that ran the sessions, talked about the artistic endeavours he was doing and how amazing they were, and the men's group were a little bit, the dance class? Dance class? Am I in a dance class? I don't know. They saw it as their keep fit class. They were going for being active together and being part of a social group. The artistic outcome was a mere kind of offshoot of that was this kind of nice residual effect after it. It was more being together and being active, which I think the more kind of groups that form like this, I think it all helps people not just be that single person that sees themselves as a couch potato and realises that everyone's in the same boat, and if we work together, it's a lot more fun. But I don't know if that... Yeah.
So I'll just bring you to Janice, do you want to add to it?
Yeah, definitely. In not in all of our research, but a lot of projects we do, same thing. We tend to have women volunteer more so than men. Or when we try to do programs, interventions in communities to increase activity or change body weight, for instance, if you do a diet program, you have no problem finding women who want to volunteer. When we want to work with men to get more healthy metabolically, for diabetes risk or whatever it might be, we find that they seem to be more attracted to the physical side, the exercise activity side. But the one thing we do, instead of in advance assuming we know what they want, what we do is we do a lot of what we call formative, just early prep work with people. We ask them, if we were going to get you to come to the table, what would you want it to be about? Why wouldn't you want to do it, or what do you think about it? And I let them say all kinds of things that, that's terrible, it's stupid, da-da-da. Brilliant. Like, I'm not even remotely offended by anything anyone says, because what I'm trying to do is we're trying to gather, figuring out that information of, how would we market that to people? Like, truly, like a social marketing. How do I make it interesting to somebody else? Like you said, you wouldn't call it an exercise session. Maybe that turns people off. Or for these guys you mentioned, dance class, that freaks them out. But they thought it was a keep fit, and that keep fit worked for them, if you know what I mean. So I think for you, you've got your community, chat with people, figure out, what else would they like to do? How do they want to engage? What might that look like? And then develop organically, things that maybe could be attractive versus in research we do it all the time and it's a mistake. We assume in advance, we know what people want, we know what they need, and we're going to offer it to them, and then we get so frustrated when people don't show up. And I always tell my colleagues, because you're going the wrong direction. Do it the other way around. and then people will engage. I don't know if that's helpful, but...
I remember in the early 1980s, Peter Shea, who was a big wheel in the U3A at the time, a member of Stevenage U3A as well, and helped the London U3A to get off the ground. But he was, apart from being a psychologist, he was a barn dance caller, and he choreographed a dance called the U3 Amble, which in those days we used to do at the annual conferences. I'm sure it should be reinstituted. But the setup was a man between two women, because that was that was the demographics of the membership. And it was partly to do, certainly in those days, with the demographics, and to a certain extent the social canvas. That there were more older women, many more older women than men, and all things to do with retirement and women as workers and so on was determining in those times. It's less so now. That there were actually a lot more women than men in the third age. I'm not talking so much now just about an age divider, because as you know, we've always tried to avoid doing that. But in terms of the definition of the third age, there were a lot more women than men. That was one thing. That's evening up a bit, certainly on the demographic statistics front. The years in which the lifestyles of men and women have become closer have also begun to eradicate the division in numbers. The numbers now are getting more equal. But I'd like to make a positive point about it. I mean, we constantly hear about organisations which are flooded by men and run by men and organised by men, starting with the Houses of Parliament, government, BBC, everywhere you look, people are complaining because there's not enough women. Well, there are only two sexes. I mean, in any organisation, there are going to be more of one than the other. What's wrong with that? Maybe we should be making a song and dance about you know, what a wonderful organisation we are. We have more women than men in what's supposed to be a men-orientated society. And I go back to my point about U3A and its attractions. I don't think I'd worry about it too much. I think we should all be out there recruiting, and if we happen to recruit more women than men, so be it. Wouldn't worry too much about it.
Okay. So, I'm going to go to that lady back there with the microphone in green.
Hello, Jane Burgess, Bakewell U3A. This isn't my question, but Ed, I think a number of people might be interested in the name of that pamphlet, if you could just give that out again.
Yeah, so this one is it's called the Handbook for Cultural Engagement with Older Men, and it's available to download from the Whitworth website, which is through the University of Manchester. So I don't know, what's the best way? Is it just sort of read it out now? Is there a way of sending it round or something?
If you, Ed will give me the details.
Yeah.
And we will send it out with some feedback after today.
Yeah, but it sits within the context of lots of other research, and I think that's why, you know, the idea of, you know, should U3A kind of reach out to people that aren't, you know, it's diversification, isn't it? It's kind of, should they be conscious of the people that aren't taking part? And I think the strength of what Manchester and the Age Friendly Network there has is that not any single organisation has to try and solve any single issue, you know, collectively. Absolutely. And I think that's the gap that maybe U3A was looking for. So that was interesting. But the kind of why, so why would you, the need is really well articulated in a really, really good report that I think came out in either 2014 or 2015 by the Campaign to End Loneliness. They did a study around looking at the effects of social isolation and loneliness, and really some of the areas that can help around that, and some things around arts and culture came out about that. But within that study, there's big difference between men and women, and even difference within the idea of men, and huge numbers of people within a huge number of males that would recognise themselves as socially isolated, that wasn't correlating to the number that would say they were lonely. So that idea of actually people retreating into that kind of the solitary man's shed being that thing that people are comfortable with. So there's really good research out there that I think always starting with a need is a really good to approach things. So if a group's working really well and maybe your community doesn't have the need to look into diversifying, then that's fine. But when there is a need, I think we should always look to try and do our best to tackle it. So yeah, there's other reports out there, but yeah, ours is good too.
Can you see the message here?
All right, so the message, so
Yeah.
we can link to the leaflet from the website. So you'll get links to it on the website. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
My question was actually not about that at all. It was about dementia, which is another of the issues that's beginning to affect a number of us. At Bakewell U3A, we're just about to start to engage on a programme to understand dementia better right the way across the U3A, to bring in some education from outside bodies like Alzheimer's UK, and to start to form groups for dementia support. Out of the three areas that you're talking about, sort of education, culture and exercise, would you say one of those was more important to help to address the symptoms of dementia, to help people live well for longer?
I wouldn't claim that any one is necessarily more important. I think having that full round richness throughout our lives is optimal for everybody. I can speak though from the exercise and nutrition standpoint, because that's an area I know well, so I will focus on that. Throughout our life, the way we eat and how much activity we engage in does have a very strong association with our risk for dementia as we age. So dementia has lots of probably causes and mechanisms that contribute, but a lot of it's really linked with the vasculature, the vessels in the brain. And of course, the vessels in the brain are no different from the vessels we have in our heart. And so a lot of the dietary nutritional aspects you might hear about to reduce the risk for heart disease could also very much apply to brain health, including dementia, particularly around things like a lot of fruits and vegetables and whole grains, because the micronutrients, the vitamins and the minerals in fruits, vegetables and whole grains directly link with how well our vessels stay healthy. So that's really important. The same thing in terms of physical activity. We need some level of stress in our vessels, good stress that's related to increased blood flow from activity is very beneficial. So those two things are quite important. It's never too late to do it, but if we talk about prevention, the sooner we do it and the longer we do it for, the better for both of those things. But even in older age, even once diagnosed, there's, I think, some positive things that can be done as well. And I do have colleagues, if you're interested, maybe you can contact me about this. I have colleagues in our school who specifically study and work with dementia, brain health, and they also do a lot with Alzheimer's UK. Yep.
Yeah, I think the short answer is there's no. They're all equally as important. I think that the breadth of, you start looking after the whole of you, your body, your mind, and kind of spirit as well. So I think it's I think we do a lot of work around dementia as well. So we have great links with the NHS. We're the University Art Gallery. We actually sit across the road from the hospitals. We engage with people living with dementia as well as carers and family members to support the whole network that sits around the person that maybe has the illness as well, which is really important. And I feel like a travelling salesman, but we also have a yellow version of my green one that just so happens to be the handbook for cultural engagement with people living with dementia. So, which is just out this year. So, as I said, as a University Art Gallery, research is really a big part of what we do as well. So we're hoping to develop more of these to really shine a bit of a spotlight on some of the specific areas we've grown some expertise in related to arts and culture. So I can link to that. And also interesting, in the university we also have a body of academics called MICRA, which I always try and remember the correct version of, which is the Manchester Interdisciplinary Research Centre into Ageing. Yeah. Something like that, yeah, something along those lines. And they bring together academics, researchers, professionals that are looking into all aspects of ageing, sorry, not to mention ageing. So it's anything from arts, cultural activities like the research that we've done, through to architecture, town planning, design, sciences, health, things like there's great work around flooring that can detect falls and things like that. So there's lots of interesting work that's being brought together through that, and they've got a website and everything. So if you look at University of Manchester and Micro, there's a whole wealth of research there as well.
No, nothing to add. Okay, have we got any particular? I realise I've asked a few questions. All right, over here.
I think this is for Janice.
Yes.
Should the National Health Service change its approach to diabetes?
So I don't think I couldn't catch that. Did you hear?
She asked, should the National Health Service change their approach to diabetes? Okay. Well, actually, they are. So they're currently in England is the National Diabetes Prevention Program, which has started over the last couple of years. They've done testing across demonstration sites. So they already are trying to do more prevention where they identify people at high risk for type 2 diabetes but who have not yet been diagnosed. And through that, once they are detected, it's just through a simple blood test to look at whether your blood sugar levels are at a certain, they're not quite diabetes, but they're higher than they should be. Through that, it could be done through your GP, health checks, or you could just be worried yourself. Maybe you have family risk or you're concerned. And then those folks can be referred on to community-based programs to reduce diabetes. So that's already started. And I think, though, we have to be conscious of the fact that this is going to impact on millions and millions and millions of people. So I don't blame the NHS. I think any healthcare system, and you can tell from my accent, I wasn't born necessarily in the UK, although I've been here 13 years, and I'm a proud citizen to say I am here. But I come from the US, a private, for-profit healthcare system. It also cannot cope with diabetes either, and it's got all the money in the world. So I think what we really need to change is not so much the NHS per se. What we need to do, in my view, is to be more conscious of how we can help the NHS not have to take on the full burden of the fact that we can prevent type 2 diabetes. We can prevent most cases from happening, but it's not just individuals making the choice to make the change we need. We also have to create cultures, communities, and climates by which we can actually live those changes, and then we would reduce our risk. So I think it's really, to me, a partnership with everybody. I don't think one particular agency or institution can solve it all. The NHS is doing everything they can. And of course, we pay into the NHS with our tax money, which is really important. And what I love about it is that we all have access. In the US, I've worked with people who have the highest diabetes rates in the world. They have no health care. They have no access to health care because there is not a national system for them. So what we do there is try to get as much prevention as we can. But when people need treatment, they're pretty desperate at the end, and the treatment is much more difficult than it would be if we caught them earlier on. So I think there is definitely a healthcare push in this country through the NHS to do all they can throughout every phase, but I think it also comes back to us as communities, not just individuals, but families and groups, to say, what can we start doing to make sure we can do what we need to do to prevent diabetes, and not just leave it up to me as the sole individual that I have to fix everything, but what can we do together? Because it's so pervasive, it's going to take more than what I think one institution or one agency can put into it.
Okay. Anybody else got a question they want to ask? Yeah.
Hi, it's a question for Janice. It's about fitness and this magical 10,000 steps that we do a day. How do you feel on that, and what amount of exercise should we do a day?
Well, 10,000 steps isn't magical. Some people now say it should be 7,000. Some people say it should be 12,000. The bottom line is I think the message really needs to be doing what you can and doing it regularly. That's what's important. So 10,000 steps a day might be too low for some people, because they're already doing substantially more. It could be so much for another person that they'll never achieve it, so they would give up and they don't want to do anything because they feel like such a failure. So then that's not a good message. So if 10,000 steps a day works for people and gets them out and they do that, and that's a way they document their own movement, that's brilliant. But it's like the other things we were talking about. Every way to get people active is sort of tailored to what will get them interested, keep them motivated. And some people like to count, other people can't bear to count. They don't want to keep track that way. So I would say it's daily, finding ways every single day to move, get up out of the chair, get out and about, and have that culminate over time, and do things that you enjoy, because then you're more likely to do them. If you're a counter and you love keeping track, go for it. There's tools for you to do that. It's fantastic. Some people that motivates, other people it deflates them, if you will. So I don't know if that answers your question, but 10,000 steps a day is great for some. Too much for others, not enough for other people. So I use it just to know if I actually got out of my chair enough, because my job forces me to sit all day. But I like to get 20,000 if I can. That would be my goal, but I'm in a different place, so.
Thank you.
Not there's the other lady there.
Sorry, if I got, so this gentleman down here.
There was another lady there.
Oh, sorry, if I got somebody up there.
There's another lady there.
Then you.
Hello, I'm Janice Moore from Bakewell U3A. As I'm sure you know, U3A groups are organised around interest groups, meeting quite often monthly for a couple of hours to do something. I wondered, with your particular professional interests, if you were going to come to Bakewell every month to run a group for us, what groups would you start?
What groups would you start? If you were starting a U3A group, what group would you start? Eric, you start.
What group would I start?
If you were going to start a group, what would you start?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I catch the gist of the question yet, do you?
Well, if you were going to develop a new group in Bakewell, what topic area would you, what theme would you
do you mean there are, as well as the ones that are ongoing?
Yes. So if you've got personal interest in a kind of group that you would start?
Right.
We'll come back to
Yeah.
you. We'll come back
Yeah.
to you. Do you want to start, Janice? You say what group you would start. Yeah.
Ooh, I think it goes back to the earlier question about who I'm trying to attract. So it would be simple and easy just to say, exercise groups, but or healthy eating groups, but I don't know what that would mean to people. I think what I'd like to do is figure out a way to get people who are less likely to engage and do a group that actually is diverse enough with activities that it would attract different people to come in and try different things, expose people to things that maybe they wouldn't be normally even know they might be interested in. So I would maybe have a rotational theme approach where we would have people vote or put their hand up to say, I want something on this and I want something on this. Maybe you already do that, but to me, I would find that fun. I love to do art myself, so I already exercise and do healthy eating. No offense, I know all about that. I don't want to keep doing that. I do that every day for 12 to 14 hours a day. What I would love to do is a chance to do more physical art. I want to paint. I want to go to a gallery and learn something about this. So I think for me, I wouldn't have just one set of group. I don't know how you already do it, but I would say I like to go to things that offer me different things every time, and then I can dip in and out or whatever. And like I said, maybe that's how you already arrange it. I don't know, but.
Yeah, I guess for me the answer would be that I would never just come to Bakewell and say a group that I would do. I would spend some time in Bakewell to see what was the need there. But I think what artists are really good at. So I quite often work with artists to help us work with different audiences to create projects and opportunities. And I think what artists are really good at is seeing things differently, or have really imaginative approaches to creative problem solving. So we did a project in a care home in South Manchester, and the artist came in, had no kind of pre-idea of what was happening, and spent a bit of time with the group. And what came out of that is a lot of the hesitation around other people than those interested joining such groups, especially because when they're focused around interest or specialism, is people feeling they didn't have the level of knowledge, understanding, skill to make that first step into those groups. So we set up a monthly session that was called Make Mistakes, and it was about people coming together intentionally to try and mess things up. So everyone was making mistakes together, and it wasn't at a set level. So the people that were the best painters weren't allowed to paint till right at the very end. They had to try sculpture and sit next to someone. You know, it was a really good sharing of skills and an equalising of skills. So maybe something like that just got people to do the opposite of what they think they're good at and fail at something together.
Yeah, I think I was technically because I was slightly disadvantaged by knowing what the welter and range of groups were in the U3A. You know, some U3As offering over 100 different interest groups which cover all the range that we're talking about. I mean, personally, I'd start a concert party if I had the chance. I think from the U3A angle, trying to answer the question within the U3A ethic, I think it would be more about encouraging people to be in more than one interest group. I remember meeting a guy in Sheffield who was a member of a walking group, a painting group and a philosophy group, and I christened him a Renaissance prince. It seemed to me he'd got the perfect balance of an intellectual activity, a physical activity and an artistic activity. What I do find sometimes is that people have joined the U3A because they're running a bridge group or because they're running a Scrabble group or a Japanese language group, or whatever it might be, which particularly attracts them, and they're just wedded to that group. I'm sure you've all know of that and recognise what I'm talking about. I think the real answer for us as advocates of the U3A idea is to try and encourage people to join other groups. We should remember that we talk about having members rather than tutors and students. We expect, group leaders to be in another group where they're, not the leader, as it were. I remember, I think it was London U3A, there was a woman who taught French for 40 years, and I think that the half expectation was that she would run a French conversation group, but she said, to hell with that, I've had enough of French for 40 years, je ne sais quoi, and I've always been interested in poetry, never had a chance to get involved with it, I know nothing about it, I'll run a poetry group for you. It's that mix of, I think, of some people bringing with them into the U3A the experiences and skills they've had over a lifetime, and on the other hand, people, as Ed's saying, grasping at new things, trying out new things. Another memory I have is comparing a concert done by Stevenage U3A, who, I don't know if they still have it now, but they used to have a thing called a can't sing choir, which was a good idea in itself, could you go around saying, give us a song, well, I can't sing, well, you're in this choir, And Joe and the lady who was running it built that up with an orchestra as well. The choir and the orchestra together was about 60 strong. When it started, first afternoon, she asked for people to, if they'd an instrument, bring it along. She started with a woman with a violin and a man who learned to play the mouth organ in a prisoner war camp. And she started with that and built it all up. So I always remember doing that. She used to talk about, there were one or two soloists and so on, and she'd talk about them and the backgrounds. and there was a duet from Don Giovanni, and the man had been singing as an amateur but trained since 1921. I'm going back a long way, of course, now. And the woman had been singing for 3 months. I always thought it was a good combine of what we're about. Chap retaining, keeping going, not feeling because he was old, he had to stop singing. Woman who'd been always very busy, perhaps sang in the bath, I don't know. She probably always, probably sang along with, songs of praise on Sunday with the words always going too slowly, in my opinion, but that's another question. And suddenly finding this opportunity. And it was a wonderful duet. The fact that it was done well was a bonus. To be honest, I wasn't particularly interested in how good it was. What fascinated me was the fact that it was happening at all.
Okay. Any questions from over this line? All right. Oh, yeah. Can I take this? I'm getting overruled. Go on then. I'll take the lady there, and then I'll take the gentleman in the front. Go.
So shall I go?
Oh.
Yeah. My question is, I'm still a bit concerned about what is meant by an age-friendly city. I mean, we know Manchester because our daughter lives in Manchester, but how would you make Birmingham an age-friendly city? Because given partly that it's a very young city, it's got one of the youngest populations. So how do you actually, in practice, make Birmingham an age-friendly city?
Before Ed answers that, I should remind you that, speaking as a Mancunian, that Manchester has always been known as the city of iron with the heart of gold. So it's got a head start.
How do you make different cities age-friendly cities? Well, I think it's just about making so I think if you could say a youth-friendly city or age-friendly city, whatever you're approaching, that is about putting those voices at the heart of what you do. So including those people. So Manchester has a great age-friendly board of older residents that inform decision-making. So a part of that conversation within the town hall. A network of 150 what they call culture champions, which take the work that we do out into communities and share that. So it's not about institutions kind of just championing their thing, it's about peer-to-peer work, and it's across the board. So it's things like town planning. There's great projects going on around NORCs. Do you know about the NORC thing about naturally occurring retirement communities? So areas that were originally kind of established as family residential areas built for families, young adults with children, and then those areas kind of naturally becoming populated as people stay by older residents, and how those communities can adapt. And that's everything from street layout, adequate seating. So it's about addressing a city-wide conversation on ageing and making sure it's all connected, I think. Quite often there's lots of energy and work done in isolation or kind of down parallel avenues. So it's about connecting things together, and I think that's potentially all that Manchester is maybe done better than other places to get the recognition it's got. It's about connecting up the things that are happening. So probably all these things are happening in a lot of other cities, and learning how to be quite good at talking about it as well. So when I was in Taiwan, I think they booked, it was 5 UK arts professionals going across to Taiwan to exchange expertise. So I think the British Council set up they were viewing it as these 5 cases of best practice from the UK, going and kind of instilling, this is how we've done it, And we were blown away by the standard and level of work that was happening in Taiwan. But they were almost just doing it unconsciously and hadn't got the kind of rhetoric and the language of how they champion it within their. So the arts organisations weren't yet connected to the health organisations, so things were doing it very differently. So it didn't have that level of impact across the sectors. So quite you know, people are really good at speaking to themselves rather than speaking to others. I think that's what Manchester's got better at, is developing a language that cuts through health, housing, arts, culture, and all those things, and everyone can understand the mission around age-friendly Manchester.
Thank you. Okay, so the very patient lady there.
It's okay. It's Linda Patton from Lutterworth. It's very easy for U3As to introduce groups that can deal with the arts and culture. It is not so easy for them to introduce groups that keep us moving about. I mean, we've all got walking groups, strolling groups, short walk, long walk, whatever. But as we don't employ teachers, we probably don't have yoga, Pilates, all those sort of things to keep us moving about. The only way that we can really educate our people regarding that is to ask somebody like Janice to come and do a talk at a monthly meeting. I can't really see how we can educate people to eat better or to exercise better, because we can't offer those sort of groups. Well, I don't see how easy it would be to do that. Okay.
Well, I would say you probably have, I don't know the size of your community. You know how many, what's the population of the community entirety that you might have at your disposal? For instance, the Birmingham City has over 1 million, but the Birmingham area has over 6 million people, so.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yep. Well, okay, so I've done things free for most of my life. I never get paid ever to give a talk, ever. And I'm almost 56 years old, and I've been speaking, they can't shut me up. And you don't even have to pay me. To be honest, though, I think you could look at it maybe a little bit differently and try this. I don't know your communities to know for sure, but lots of people are trying to get experience so they can become yoga instructors. And they need to do teacher training to a broad base of communities to earn their certification or earn that teaching credential. For instance, that's just an example. Same with Pilates. There's also some people who have a volunteer spirit who may be interested in offering a certain number of openings in classes for people to try it, like taster sessions, where others might pay for it. I go to yoga here in Birmingham, in a place in Harborne, and they actually offer free classes to carers. The rest of us pay for our classes, and I'm happy to do that if that's going to allow free classes for carers who don't have the resource in order to do that. So I don't know, I'm only throwing that out as just systems I've seen. Healthy eating can be talked about. You don't have to have a nutrition degree for that. You don't even have to be a dietitian. However, people in communities at maybe they could be clinical dietitians, or they could be people who are well educated in nutrition. That's a sector that speaks for free all the time. My colleagues never get paid any money to talk about how to eat well. So there might be, I don't know how you find those people, but they exist in almost every community I've ever worked in, from small towns to larger cities. So because I don't know your area, it's hard for me to give you an exact recommendation, but those are the mechanisms by which we tap into all the time. We're delivering a very large multi-site exercise intervention for older adults across the UK right now. The delivery of that is being done for free by community organizations. We don't pay them a penny. We train them, but then they do it because it's part of their remit for what they do. And they absorb that into the cost of what they're doing for the benefit of the older adults and the research. So, I'm just not sure how you broker it, but those are some examples of things we've done that have been cost-free because of different contributions people are willing to make.
I think the way the E3A works is it's led by volunteer people who may not have any experience in that field, and people learn together. And so I think what you're saying is use the resources in your community if you can find them for free, but don't necessarily think you have to have an expert for some things.
Correct. I mean, I think to teach yoga, you'd want to have some experience of doing yoga, but I'm not a certified yoga instructor. If by law somebody would let me offer classes to colleagues or friends that I know, and I could do that within the regulations of safety, that's a possibility. But is anyone in U3A interested in being a yoga instructor? If they were, is this a mechanism by which they can, because the hardest bit of becoming a yoga instructor isn't taking the classes, that's pretty straightforward. It's finding people to teach when you aren't certified yet. So I don't know if somebody is interested in being a Pilates instructor or being a yoga instructor, is there a way that the volunteers themselves can get the training, and how could that somehow be covered creatively? I don't know.
And are there, aside from Pilates and walking and yoga, would you suggest any other kind of activity that is good for people to undertake, which maybe doesn't need a particular instructor or particular expert guidance?
As I said before, anything. Just moving. I mean, walking's easy because we can all, well, not always easy for everyone, but walking is something we can think of that we can get up and do. But you don't have to go to a gym. Just moving around. You can move around your house. If you have stairs in the house, try to go up and down. There's ways you can literally lift things like household objects, bags of groceries, tins of food. There's all kinds of things that people can do. It really is moving. And people say, well, I don't know how, but what they do instead is they sit. We measure older adults. Older adults sit for 8 to 14 hours a day. They sit and hardly move. And I've got objective little tools that measure that. So what they're doing is they're not just avoiding an actual formal activity, they're literally not getting up, other than to use the toilet on occasion. And that's what's really, really concerning. So any activity that someone wants to do is good for you. There's not such a bad thing unless you are lifting really heavy weights and you have very high blood pressure and it's dangerous and you get crushed. That would be a bad thing. But, and I don't mean that jokingly. I mean, there are certain exercises for certain health conditions you shouldn't do, but you can work with your GP on that type of thing. But really, movement is quite important.
I'm aware that in across U3As, there's a wider band of activity, physical activity, belly dancing. I remember from a visit somewhere, but it may be that some of these things are not walking. Okay, everybody has walking groups, but there are others that are active and ongoing. And maybe there should be a bit more outsourcing or reminders of that to, all the other U3A groups. And I've just thought of another U3A group for our friend over here who wants me to start a new one. An activity which is spreading like wildfire. And maybe answering another question, men would be interesting, that's walking football, which is very strong in its development with leagues and all the rest of it. I'll be very cross if anyone reminds me that Manchester United have already adopted that principle. But it is worth a thought. Walking football, U3A, cup final at Wembley. Can't whack it.
And there are some areas of activity of physical activity that people have started and just use resources to do that. So, for example, Beccles U3A have started a ballroom dancing group, and they've got to a fairly good standard just from following DVDs on a large screen in a hall. So there's lots of things we can do. We just need to get on and do them, I guess. Okay, this gentleman.
John Hilborn, Harborne and Edgbaston, U3A. In some versions of Christianity, it's said there are 7 deadly sins and 7 virtues. Are there the equivalent of 7 deadly sins and 7 virtues as far as successful aging is concerned and or successful U3As?
Okay, right.
Can you say that again?
So, are there any deadly sins or any particular virtues in
right.
ageing successfully or in the youth sphere.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I would list 7. I'll maybe get the ball. We've each say a couple. So I kind of joked earlier about never doing anything on my own in the work that we do, and I was mainly talking about collaborating with other groups. But I think that is absolutely one of the key points, is kind of keeping connected, being part of social networks, constantly building new social networks. I've found working with lots of different people, lots of different groups, has been one of the main points that I would definitely put into one of the 7 things. What else would I put? I think there's a lot of work that is done around the 5 ways of well-being, which I think really work across. It's not an ageing thing, but really definitely worth looking at.
I think of the actual 7 deadly sins, sloth would be the one to avoid in a U3A, because as soon as a U3A stops moving, loses its dynamic, stops recruiting, or closes its doors, or has a waiting list, and so on. In fact, I'd come to think of it, apart from sloth, I think I'd separate off having a waiting list as the an 8th deadly sin. Stopping, being static. We've heard all this, all this experience about health and keeping active and so on. The same applies to organisations. If you stop exerting yourself, you soon slide the other way. And it's difficult I remember John Mauger, you probably know John Mauger, I think he's the Director of Research for the National Health Service. His work was very crucial to the formation of the U3A, because at the time he published a piece of clinical research about older age, which talked about the fitness gap. It was the gap that opened up as you got older between what you did do and what you could do. And he had explanations of that. And I think it was something like a third of the explanation was cultural. It was the element of older people acting out the part of being older people and stopping doing things, changing, because what used to be called anti-age behaviours. They wouldn't. I remember a case in Norwich of an old lady who wanted to join a tap dance class, and a daughter stopped her. And when the people running the class sort of talked to her about it, she kept going on about insurance and she might break a leg and whatnot. But what it really came down to was she thought it was unseemly for a woman in her 70s to be tap dancing. So there was sibling pressure as well as the thoughts going on in the romance. It was a happy ending to the story. The woman won 2 silver medals for tap dancing. But as John Mauger was pointing out, it's much better than it was now, partly because of the U3A. Older people were performing as older people, stopping doing things because it wasn't age appropriate. I think you've got to remember too, just reflecting on our membership, and although, as I say, I'm very ambitious that it should be 1 million rather than 500,000, when I did the research in 1982, only 200,000 people in the age group were engaged in any form of educational activity at all. And a good deal of that, on both sides, was to do with older people feeling, oh, education's not for me, I'm old, and the people who are offering the education say, well, there's no point in educating older people, you know, because why, you know? What would they do with it, you know? As though it was some sort of commodity of that kind. So, you know, I'm reflecting on how far we've got. You know, there are 2.5 times as many people in the U3A now as there were older people doing anything at all in 1982.
Do you want to reflect on a sin or a virtue?
Sins are so much more fun. I won't repeat what everyone else has said. I think I'm in full agreement, and I think it's in a sense, it's stagnation that can happen, or again, it's lack of belief or confidence that someone can do something. I think those are the things I observe across the lifespan. It's not just older people, but it happens even from a young age going through. And I think that's probably one of those things that we all hopefully can positively fight against, is feeling that somehow we have to limit or stop ourselves or other people from, you know, being as fulfilled and active as they choose to be, whether that's socially, culturally, you know, from an educational standpoint, from a physical standpoint. Those are the kinds of things that I think we sort of build boxes for ourselves and other people. And I'm somebody who likes to break boxes and tear them down and not have them really. I can't even stand fences that you can see through, really. I'm kind of an extreme person that way. But I'm like, I think the more of us that feel that way, and the more we can create opportunities for other people to feel empowered to engage with that behavior. And we can do that even respectfully to, everyone has cultural norms that or social norms they feel they want to be a part of and want to follow. But I think sometimes pushing back on those can be quite fun and a healthy and enjoyable thing to do without threatening everybody as well. So that's just sort of my viewpoint in everything in life. I don't know if that's useful or not.
Okay, any final questions before we wrap up? No. I'm just going to ask each one of the panels, I want to say one final thing, possibly something to do with what helps people make that lifestyle change to exercise or to take part in the arts or to take part in lifelong learning. What would you say is a trigger? That's a difficult one, isn't it? Yeah. Can you think? Anybody?
Well, I borrow from the first age. I think I worked for a very long time with a sociologist, Cambridge sociologist, Shelley Halsey, who himself came from a fairly poor background, back of King's Cross Station. His father was a railwayman who got wounded in the First World War, and and so on. He reckoned that if a working class boy or girl got on well against the norm, to become to get on education and so on. There was there was always, he reckoned and had found, there was always in the background what he called an aspirer. Very often a parent, but not necessarily. So it might be a neighbour or an aunt. In my case, it was a grandmother. And I think that's certainly true of triggering in older age as well, in terms of any of the activities we talk about, whether it's membership of the Youth Ray or whatnot. It's having an aspirer, it's having someone who spreads the word, who encourages, gives somebody that, might be a relation, a neighbour, a friend, somebody you meet, in the pub or when you're shopping and you feel that they need a bit of a boost, just to make that effort, just to be holding their arm as they cross the threshold into the U3A room or wherever it might be. And I think that and the welcoming nature of institutions. I go back to my very first thoughts when I was talking about what Henry Morris, the creator of the Cambridge Village Colleges, used to call the insulated school. So many institutions are walled and embattled and encastled and not very easy to get into. Not easy to get out of either once you get in. But you know what I mean? And having a comfortable welcome. I mean, one of the things that Michael Young, one of the two founders, was most pleased about as a community educator who wanted to see education permeating through the community was that a good deal of U3A activity took place in people's houses. He thought that was absolutely first class. It was so welcoming, non-formal, friendly, cup of tea and a biscuit. So I think I think the two go together. If you have a few aspirers knocking about and you've got a welcoming atmosphere, then that will trigger the involvement.
Triggers, yeah, I think in my experience, it's different for every person we work with, but I think it's often change, isn't it? So a meaningful, impactful change in someone's life is the trigger, and it's all too often what's looked upon as a negative change in terms of whether it's a medical or loss of those kind of social connections they have. And I think the work that we do tries to always strive for people to be looking to constantly have new experiences. So we often look for moving away from models that are based around reminiscence to looking at imagination and looking at new things to be taken upon every day. And I think as a leave-in comment, if we're kind of looking at that, I always think back to a session we did, some very similar to this, we were talking about people talking about the work they did, and someone stood up at the end and said, it was an older guy, and he said, "I've heard you all afternoon talk about what organisations can do for older people. When is someone going to ask what older people can do for older organisations?" And I think that's, for me, what drives my work. It's not just seeing older audiences as a group to participate in the things we do, but who can impact on what we do. Really talented, great imagination, and have got a lot to give. So I think it's that. It's working with people as opposed to for people.
Anything to add?
Only that if we could answer that question, we all are going to retire and we can go home because we will have solved some of the world's biggest issues in terms of health. I think what we do know is that the reasons why people become active or make changes to their diet or their nutrition intake really varied, but that's not the reason people sustain their behaviors. So it's almost a two-level thing. There's something that is a trigger, maybe health or other things, but then once they've dealt with that, it's how do they keep that going, and that's even the harder bit of, so that's where enjoyment, that's where people finding value in things that they do, or something that ties them to it that moves beyond, well, I finally lost that X number of pounds, or now I'm a bit more fit, so I'm there. Because with exercise or physical activity and healthy eating, it is something that to keep yourself benefiting from it, you have to keep doing it. And we can stop for a little bit, but you lose the benefits fairly quickly. So I wish I had the magic answer, because then we'd all be really happy, but that's all I can do.
Okay, well, we'll draw it to a close. I want to say thank you very much to Professor Janice Thompson, to Ed Watts and to Eric Midwinter, and to all of you who've taken part in the debate this afternoon. So let's thank our panel. Thank you very much, all of you, for taking part, for doing all the hard work this morning, and I hope you very much have enjoyed this afternoon, and I hope you have a safe journey home. Thank you.
We're going to do lots and lots and lots of
emails.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. No, thanks. That's good. Yeah, it's been amazing the reach it's had. Yeah.
Well, I think it's fantastic even, you know, in the research we do, this isn't
Where's the-
about
where's the-
cultural engagement, it's about
Here's
engagement
the
in
bus.
everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really?
Right.
Yeah.
Here's the...
Oh, no problem. Ah.